Driver.
The FBI's job was simple: find the criminals, build the case, put them away. But for 20 years in Las Vegas, one casino and the man who ran it had a different arrangement. The FBI knew exactly who he was. They knew where the money came from. They knew about the bodies, and they did nothing. Not because they were incompetent, not because the evidence wasn't there, but because this casino and the man behind it had something the most powerful law enforcement agency in America needed more than a conviction. His name was Mo Dowlitz, and this is his desert. Hi, my name is Michael, and this is Old Vegas Legends. The man who couldn't be touched. To understand what Mo Dowlitz built in the desert, you have to understand where he came from. And where he came from was a world that would have gotten any other man killed 3 times over. Morris Barney Dowlitz was born in Boston in 1910 and raised in Detroit. His father ran a laundry business, legitimate, modest, unremarkable. Young Mo watched his father work hard for small money and decided early that he had a different relationship with ambition in mind. By the time Prohibition hit, Dowlitz was already running with the wrong crowd in the right direction. He fell in with what became the Cleveland Syndicate, a confederation of bootleggers who operated across Ohio, Michigan, and Kentucky with a precision that would have impressed a Fortune 500 boardroom. These weren't street thugs. They were businessmen who happened to be selling something the government said you couldn't sell. They ran routes, they kept books, they thought 3 moves ahead. And here's what made Dowlitz genuinely dangerous. He wasn't the most violent man in the room. He was the most rational one. Bugsy Siegel was impulsive. Capone was theatrical. Both ended badly. Dowlitz watched and drew the obvious conclusion. The criminals who survived weren't the toughest ones. They were the ones who made themselves impossible to replace. After Prohibition, the syndicate expanded into illegal casinos across Ohio and Kentucky. Carpet joints, fancy rooms, honest games, well, honest-ish. He built relationships with politicians, judges, and law enforcement everywhere he operated. Then, in the late 1940s, the heat rose. Federal pressure, state crackdowns. The window was closing. Mo Dowlitz looked west. The Desert Inn and the Dream. 1950. Las Vegas was still a rumor told in neon. The Flamingo had been open 3 years. The Thunderbird, the El Rancho, the Frontier, a handful of properties scattered along a 2-lane highway through the Mojave with dreams bigger than their bank accounts. And on April 24th, 1950, Wilbur Clark's Desert Inn opened on the Las Vegas Strip. Now, I say Wilbur Clark's Desert Inn because that's what it said on the sign. Wilbur Clark was a charming, glad-handing promoter who had had the vision to buy the land and start construction in 1947. He just had one problem. He ran out of money. 3 years into construction, the Desert Inn was a skeleton, and Wilbur Clark was broke. Enter Mo Dowlitz and the Cleveland Syndicate. They came in with the financing, somewhere between $1.3 and $1.5 million, a significant sum in 1949, and in exchange, they took a 74% controlling interest in the property. Wilbur kept his name on the marquee and his face at the ribbon cutting. He was the front. He was the smile. He was, and I mean this with some affection, the world's most expensive lawn ornament. The real owners stood slightly behind him in the photographs. What the Cleveland boys built was unlike anything else on the Strip at that moment. The Desert Inn wasn't just a casino. It had a golf course, an 18-hole championship golf course in the middle of the Mojave Desert, which is either the most brilliant idea or the most insane idea in the history of real estate. And in this case, it was both simultaneously. The rooms were genuinely elegant. The restaurants were serious. The entertainment was first class. The Desert Inn had what the other joints on the Strip were still faking: actual sophistication. It attracted a different kind of customer: politicians, executives, entertainers who wanted to be seen somewhere that felt like more than a casino with carpet. Frank Sinatra performed there. Noel cowered. The Desert Inn was the place that said to the rest of America, Las Vegas isn't just for degenerates and drifters, it's for you too, provided you can afford the suite. And behind all that elegance, in the count room every single night, money was being pulled out of the official tallies and sent north to Cleveland. That's the thing about class in Las Vegas. It was always a costume, and the Desert Inn wore it better than anyone. J. Edgar Hoover and the deal that wasn't written down. Here's where the story gets complicated. And by complicated, I mean, here's where it becomes the most extraordinary thing you've heard all week. J. Edgar Hoover directed the FBI from 1924 until he died in office in 1972. 48 years. The most powerful law enforcement official in American history. The man who built the Bureau from nothing into the premier investigative agency in the world. And for most of that career, Hoover maintained one official, unwavering position. Organized crime in America did not exist. Let that breathe. The director of the FBI looked at the Cosa Nostra, looked at Meyer Lansky's National Crime Network, a network so sophisticated it had its own accounting department, and said publicly, repeatedly, that none of it was real. Some historians say he believed communism was the bigger threat. Some say he didn't want the impossible mandate of attacking something that embedded in American political life. And some say the answer is simpler and darker than any of that. Some say Hoover was compromised. The key is a place called the Del Charro Hotel in Ladoa, California. For years through the 1950s, Hoover vacationed there every summer with his companion Clyde Tolson. Weeks at a time, paid nothing, not reduced rates, nothing. The Del Charro was owned by Texas oil billionaire Clint Murchison, who was a close business partner of Mo Dalitz. I'm not a lawyer, but even I can see that when the FBI director takes years of free vacations from a man connected to the people he's supposed to be investigating, something is structurally wrong. No signed agreement, no written conversation. These were sophisticated men. They understood how the world worked. The FBI field agents in Vegas knew the truth. They filed reports. Those reports disappeared. Agents who pushed too hard got reassigned. The message was institutional and unmistakable. Leave the Desert Inn alone. 20 years of daylight robbery. So, let's talk about what 20 years of federal immunity actually looks like in practice. The skim at the Desert Inn was a masterpiece of operational design. Every night, before the official count, trusted men in the count room would pull cash from the drop boxes, the metal containers that collected money from the tables throughout the day. They would undercount, they would divert. The official number that went into the books was real enough to satisfy state gaming regulators. The real number was significantly higher, and the difference went somewhere else. Cash. Always cash. Because cash has no memory. Couriers would carry it out. Men who looked like salesmen, like businessmen, like anyone. They'd fly to Cleveland, to Detroit, to Chicago. They'd deliver envelopes and bags, and sometimes suitcases, to the men who'd invested in the Desert Inn's success and expected their return on that investment, none of which appeared on any tax document anywhere in America. Estimates vary on how much moved through the Desert Inn's skim during those 20 years. Serious estimates, from federal investigators who tried to reconstruct it years later, suggest the number is in the tens of millions of dollars. Others say it's higher. The honest answer is that we'll never know exactly, because the people who knew aren't talking, and the records that existed were never meant to survive. What we do know is that the Desert Inn was profitable beyond what its books suggested. State tax authorities occasionally raised questions. Gaming Control Board auditors would look at the numbers and furrow their brows. And then the questions would go away. Because the Desert Inn had friends, and not just in Cleveland, politicians came through the Desert Inn's front door as guests. Senators, congressmen. A sitting governor of Nevada had his relationship with the property. You didn't come to the Desert Inn and have a conversation that was later repeated. You came, you were treated exceptionally well. You left with a warm feeling about Mo Dalitz, and that warm feeling had value. That warm feeling was an investment in future goodwill. Mo Dalitz was meticulous about it. He remembered your wife's name. He remembered your children's names. He sent gifts at Christmas. He made phone calls at the right moments. He was, by all accounts of people who knew him, genuinely charming and genuinely warm. And he used that warmth the way a chess player uses pawns. Deliberately, purposefully, building a board position that would take years for anyone to untangle. Kefauver knocks, nobody answers. In 1951, Senator Estes Kefauver dragged the American underworld into the living rooms of ordinary Americans. His Senate committee held televised hearings that became the first genuine national television event in history. 14 million people watched mob figures, bookies, and casino operators sweat under the lights. Mo Dalitz testified. Picture this: one of the most powerful organized crime figures in America, sitting before a Senate committee, cameras broadcasting to 14 million viewers, being asked pointed questions about bootlegging, illegal gambling, and the company he kept. Dalitz smiled. Kefauver asked directly about the bootlegging, about the millions made running illegal liquor during Prohibition. And Dalitz, calm as a man ordering breakfast, said something to the effect of, "Senator, if you people hadn't written Prohibition into law, I wouldn't have had any reason to bootleg in the first place." The room laughed. Kefauver moved on. Dalitz acknowledged the illegal Ohio and Kentucky gambling operations with the demeanor of a man confessing to a parking violation. That was before Nevada. He was legitimate now. Licensed? What exactly was the allegation? He walked out untouched. The Kefauver hearings ruined some careers. But Dalitz heard a completely different message. He heard, "You are the kind of criminal America finds interesting, rather than threatening." He acted accordingly. The political machine behind the curtain. By the middle of the 1950s, Mo Dalitz had done something that should have been impossible. He had become respectable, not in the private knowledge of the people who understood exactly who and what he was, but in the public record, in the newspaper society pages, in the civic life of Las Vegas, which was still a city inventing itself from scratch and not especially particular about who showed up to help build it. Dalitz gave money to hospitals. He funded medical research. The Sunrise Hospital in Las Vegas was built in large part through Dalitz's connections and financial involvement. Later, there would be a cancer research center that bore his name, the Mo Dalitz Cancer Research Center at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, a cancer research center named after a man whose associates had given several people cancer of the bullet wound over the preceding decades. I don't say that to be glib. I say it because it is the central paradox of Mo Dalitz's life, and it deserves to be said plainly. He was simultaneously one of the most generous civic contributors in Las Vegas history, and a man who had spent decades as a key figure in American organized crime. Both of those things were completely true. Las Vegas chose to emphasize one of them. The political network he maintained was vast and quiet. Judges who owed him, city officials who had eaten his food and drunk his whiskey and understood the implicit arrangement that came with that hospitality. State politicians who needed campaign contributions and didn't look too hard at where they came from. Dalitz didn't run this network loudly. He didn't need to. The whole point of real power, and Mo Dalitz understood this in his bones, is that you never have to demonstrate it. The moment you have to show someone how powerful you are, you've already lost something. Real power is the phone call that doesn't need to be made because everyone already knows what would happen if you made it. That was Dalitz, the phone call that was never made. Bobby Kennedy and the beginning of the end. Robert Francis Kennedy became Attorney General of the United States in January of 1961, and the men who ran Las Vegas felt it immediately. RFK was not J. Edgar Hoover. He had no arrangement with anyone. He had no Del Charo. He had no Summers in La Jolla. What he had was a genuine, almost personal fury about organized crime in America that dated back to his time as counsel for the Kefauver Committee's successor, the McClellan Committee, in the late 1950s. He'd sat across from Jimmy Hoffa. He'd seen the Teamsters Pension Fund used as a private bank for mob casino construction, including, by the way, the Desert Inn's own financing arrangements. He knew exactly what was happening, and he had the title now to do something about it. Kennedy pressured Hoover in ways no one had successfully pressured him before. The FBI's official position, organized crime doesn't exist, became politically untenable. The public record was too clear. The Kefauver hearings had been too public. After the 1957 Appalachian meeting, where New York State Police stumbled onto a gathering of over 60 mob bosses from across the country and the entire country, realized the FBI's position was not just wrong, but absurdly, obviously wrong, Hoover had already been quietly forced to create the top hoodlum program. But it was Bobby Kennedy who made the pressure real, who pushed investigations, who authorized wiretaps, who made clear that the Department of Justice under his watch was going to treat organized crime as the national crisis it actually was. Las Vegas felt it. The men running the Desert Inn felt it. Mo Dalitz was not a man who panicked. He had too much experience and too much discipline for panic. But he was a man who read situations with exceptional clarity. And the situation in the early 1960s was telling him something unmistakable. The arrangement that had protected the Desert Inn for more than a decade was becoming unreliable. The Hoover relationship still existed. The political connections still existed. But the climate was changing. New pressure was coming from directions that the old architecture hadn't been designed to handle. Dalitz started thinking about exits. The man who had always made himself indispensable was now trying to figure out how to become dispensable on his own terms, before someone made him dispensable on theirs. That's a different and considerably more difficult problem. He needed a buyer. He just didn't know yet that the buyer was going to show up in the most improbable way imaginable, descend from the sky in the middle of the night, and refuse to leave the penthouse. Howard Hughes rides to the rescue. November 27, 1966. 2 in the morning. A private train pulls into Las Vegas, and a convoy of black cars moves quietly up the Strip to the Desert Inn. Howard Hughes, billionaire, aviator, film producer, and man who had not been seen in public by most of the world in several years, was carried on a stretcher into the Desert Inn's 9th floor penthouse. He drew the blackout curtains, he set up his operation, and he did not leave. Weeks passed, then months. The Desert Inn's management, operating under instructions from Mo Dalitz's people, needed the penthouse back. New Year's Eve was coming. High rollers had reservations for those suites. Hughes didn't care. Hughes did not, as a general principle, do things because other people needed him to do things. The management sent word that Mr. Hughes would need to vacate the penthouse. Howard Hughes sent word back that he would like to purchase the Desert Inn instead. And here, I need you to appreciate the perfection of what happened next. Because Mo Dalitz, the man who had spent 20 years trying to figure out how to exit the Desert Inn cleanly, without federal prosecution, without mob retaliation, without leaving money on the table. Mo Dalitz was just handed his solution by an eccentric billionaire who wouldn't leave a hotel room. Hughes paid $13 million for the Desert Inn in March of 1967. $13 million for a property that had been purchased for under $2 million in 1950, that had generated tens of millions in revenue over 17 years, much of it untaxed and off the books. Dalitz and the Cleveland partners walked away with $13 million and a clean transaction. No federal case, no mob problem, no loose ends. Howard Hughes got a casino he intended to use as the foundation of a Las Vegas real estate empire, and eventually sort of forgot he owned. He bought the Sands, the Castaways, the Frontier. He was, for a brief moment, the single largest employer in the state of Nevada. He thought of himself as the man who was cleaning up Las Vegas, pushing out the mob influence, bringing respectability to the Strip. What he didn't fully reckon with was that the man he'd just handed $13 million to had already done more for his own respectability than Hughes ever managed. Mo Dalitz walked away from the Desert Inn, a wealthy man with a philanthropist's reputation and a clean record. He moved into legitimate real estate development. He built La Costa Resort and Spa in Carlsbad, California. Another project, another set of allegations, another investigation, another comfortable resolution. He remained a prominent figure in Las Vegas civic life. He was never convicted of a major crime, not one. Let me say that again because it deserves to be said. A man who ran illegal gambling operations for decades, who was a central figure in one of America's most powerful organized crime syndicates, who operated a skimming enterprise out of one of Las Vegas's premier casino properties for the better part of 20 years, never convicted. Not of the bootlegging, not of the skimming, not of any of it. What it all means. The Desert Inn was demolished in 2004. They imploded it. Of course they did. This is Las Vegas. Everything eventually gets imploded. And Steve Wynn built the Wynn Las Vegas on the same ground. 50 acres of prime strip real estate that had once belonged to Wilbur Clark's dream and Mo Dalitz's empire now holds one of the most expensive resort properties in the world. There's something fitting about that, though I'm not sure if it's ironic or just honest. Wynn Las Vegas is a legitimate operation built on the exact principles Dalitz pioneered: elegance as a business strategy, service as a competitive advantage, making the customer feel like the casino exists specifically for them. Steve Wynn learned from every property that came before his. The Desert Inn was in that education. Mo Dalitz died on August 31st, 1989, the same year as Benny Binion. Two of the men who built Las Vegas, gone in the same calendar year. Dalitz was 89 years old. He died in his apartment in Las Vegas, natural causes. He was eulogized as a philanthropist, a community builder, a man who had been essential to the development of southern Nevada. The FBI's failure with Mo Dalitz and the Desert Inn was not, in the end, a failure of intelligence or effort. The agents in the field knew. The reports existed. The evidence was there for anyone willing to follow it. The failure was structural. It was a failure of institutional integrity at the highest level, where the man who controlled the investigation had decided, for reasons that served his own interests, that this particular investigation would never fully happen. J. Edgar Hoover died in May of 1972. Still in office, still the director, still the most powerful law enforcement official in America. His private files, the ones that reportedly contained compromising information on every president, senator, and public figure of consequence in America, were destroyed by his personal secretary within hours of his death, before anyone could secure them. Whatever was in those files, whatever the full architecture of that arrangement looked like on paper, went with them. And that's the real story of the Desert Inn. Not the golf course, not the elegant suites, not the celebrities who performed there, or the high rollers who dropped fortunes at the tables. The real story is about a system, about how a criminal enterprise of sufficient sophistication, with sufficient resources and sufficient patience, can make itself not just tolerated, but protected. Not just protected, but celebrated. Not just celebrated, but memorialized in hospital wings and research centers and civic honors and obituaries that describe a man as a pillar of his community. Mo Dalitz looked at America and understood something most people never figure out. The law is not a wall. It's a negotiation, and if you are rich enough, connected enough, and smart enough to make yourself useful to the right people, the people whose job it is to enforce the law, then the law becomes something you participate in, rather than something that happens to you. The Desert Inn stood on the Las Vegas Strip for 54 years. It was many things to many people: a gambling palace, a showroom, a golf club, a meeting place for the powerful and the notorious, a nerve center of American corruption, dressed in linen tablecloths and room service, and the best steaks in Nevada. But most of all, it was proof. Proof that in this country, the most dangerous criminals aren't the ones who hide. They're the ones who shake your hand in the lobby, remember your children's names, put their name on a hospital wing, and make absolutely certain that the man whose job it is to investigate them is spending his summer vacation as their guest. That's not crime, that's infrastructure.